Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Steph Machado. I'm a reporter at WPRI 12. I want to thank RIPEC first for inviting me here today to moderate this conversation, and of course want to thank the candidates for all being here. Now, RIPEC organized this event with the general topics, as the candidates know, of taxing, spending, the influx of COVID relief money coming into Rhode Island, among other topics, of course. But I want everyone to know that the list of questions I'm about to ask are known only to me, not to RIPEC or anyone else in this room. So here's how the forum will go. I will ask the candidates a series of questions. You will each have a chance to answer each of the questions. We don't have a hard timer for your answers, but there are 6 of you here on the stage, so I'm going to ask you to please be brief, answer the question and answer concisely so that we can get through as many questions as possible in the next hour. And you will have a 1-minute closing statement at the end, and that will be timed. I'm going to ask the audience to please not applaud or react, again, so we can get through as many questions as possible. I will give you 2 opportunities to applaud, and the first one will be in just a moment as I introduce our 6 candidates. Starting to my right, we have former Secretary of State Matt Brown, former CVS executive Helena Foulkes, Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea, businesswoman Ashley Kalus, our incumbent governor Dan McKee, and community activist Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz. Please give them a round of applause. So I did pick from a hat last night the order in which we will go for the first question, and it is also recorded on video if anyone wants to doubt me. Okay. So we're going to begin with Ms. Kalus. Rhode Island has $1.1 billion to spend from the American Rescue Plan Act yet to be allocated. What is your #1 priority that you think this money should be spent on, and why?
We have a once-in-a-life opportunity to hit the reset button in Rhode Island, and we need an outsider to do it. In terms of the $1.24 billion in funding, I am not interested in one-time fixes or unfunded commitments in programs. We need to invest in education, competitiveness, and housing. In order to choose programs, we need to look at metrics, we need to look at benchmarks, key performance indicators, and standards in order to decide what will give us the best return on our money.
And Ms. Kalus, your #1 priority, please.
#1 would be education.
Thank you so much. Dr. Munoz, same question.
Thank you for the question. Growing up in Central Falls and then professionally becoming a medical doctor and understanding how the industry works and how ultimately these systems are designed, I think it's now more important than ever that we prioritize healthcare. We need to invest heavily in community health infrastructure that all working families in the state of Rhode Island are overburdened by. We need to create a sustainable healthcare system built from the ground up, which also involves allocating dollars towards a free, comprehensive community health, I would say, hub across our 5 counties. And by doing that, we need to take an active step as a state to ensure that we are controlling the procurement process so that price controls are set so that this for-profit healthcare system that overburdens businesses and working families can finally change. Thank you.
Ms. Foulkes, your #1 priority for the ARPA money.
Yeah, absolutely. My #1 priority is education. I have proposed, it's up on my website, that we spend $500 million of the $1.1 billion on education. Examples of kinds of things that I'd like to see, since COVID learning loss is the #1 issue we hear about. And just to set the table, we know that 33% of our kids are passing their reading level test scores, only 20% in math. So I will be, and you can see all the details, every item has a dollar amount next to it. And I know this is a forum of people who love good policy and details, so I've got it all on my website. But things like before and after school learning, summer learning, making sure every K-3 classroom has a teacher's assistant, making sure every single school in this state has a guidance counselor, making sure that we are investing in ESL certification. Our teachers today have to pay for it themselves out of pocket. And so I've got a host of things that I'd like to see us close the gap. I think it's both a moral duty we have to our kids and a huge economic opportunity. I recruited so many people to come work for me in my 25 years at CVS. Most of them ended up buying houses in Massachusetts, take advantage of the great public schools, and they drove 30 minutes to work. So I'd like to invest in education, and I think that can ultimately end up driving our economic engine as well.
Thank you, Ms. Folks. Mr. Brown.
Housing. So we've got a situation in this state where most people, everyone except the very rich, are struggling to afford housing. The single thing that most of us want to do more than anything else is to be able to provide for our families, including putting a roof over our families' heads, over our children's heads. And for a lot of people, that is a huge struggle right now. Rents went up 24% during COVID. That's not tenable. And we have people who completely slip through the cracks. I've met people who are working people. I've met a teacher with her daughter who are living in the car because rents went up and they couldn't afford it and they live in the car outside. So it's not tenable, it's not moral, it's cruel. And our government has taken lots of money and invested it in corporate developers to build luxury housing, including the Superman building, including the Fane Tower. $50 million of our money, the people's money, going to corporate developers to profit instead of dealing with the affordable housing issue. So our top priority with the ARPA funds would be to put it toward our program, my and Cynthia Mendes' program, she's running with me for Lieutenant Governor, to build 10,000 truly affordable homes and break the backs of this affordable housing crisis. And we would cap annual rent increases at 4% a year so people can also afford to pay rent.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Secretary Gorbea.
Yeah, I actually agree that housing is the way to really focus on solving many of the issues that are transformative. I mean, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, right? So we have to use it in a way that's long-lasting. Housing, it turns out, is foundational. A child that moves twice in a school year because the family can't afford a place to live is lost to that educational system, no matter how great those schools are. So housing gives us the opportunity to improve educational outcomes, to address issues of the environment, because housing is also the reason why we have a lot of heat and electricity-related impacts on our environment. That housing is absolutely foundational to improving our quality of life and be able to invest in an infrastructure that has an impact beyond just today into tomorrow.
Governor McKee, your #1 priority for the ARPA money.
Yeah, so during the budget process, there was two questions that I asked anybody who was going to entertain an idea of how to use those dollars. One was that it couldn't be a program that would need to be funded in the future. And two, it had to show a way that it was going to help with the economy and increasing people's income, which are the main goals that I would say. So, but in the Rhode Island 2030 plan, which I'd like to have everybody go to, ri2030.com, it's a 10-year strategy, a working document in its first edition, just coming from its first draft, and that details what we need to do in the state of Rhode Island, whether it's in housing or education, or it has to do with health care, whether it has to do with the blue economy, the green economy, is a very comprehensive report. And my budget mirrored what was in that Rhode Island 2030 plan. The funds that have been allocated in a way that is going to really help our economy, help our education, help our health care, child care, all reflects the 2030 plan. So if you want to know, what I'm proposing, what I'm asking the General Assembly to do, the investments will get into more detail in terms of, specifically how we're going to invest in the green economy, how we're going to take advantage of an economy that is opening quicker and faster and recovering and than any state in the Northeast. So the economy is central to the issue. But housing is about economy, education is about economy, child care is about economy, jobs and good paying jobs about the economy. And I'll get into more details in terms of specifically how you're going to invest $200 million in the blue economy, $35 million in ports, in East Providence, $60 million in Quonset, $30 million in bioscience, $40 million in Galilee in the fishing industry, and the list continues to go on, and I hope to have the opportunity to get into more detail.
Thank you, Governor. Our next question is about housing. Rent has been skyrocketing across Rhode Island. My colleague Ted Nisi earlier this week reported rents have gone up nearly 25% in the Providence metro area since before the pandemic, as Mr. Brown already brought up in his first answer. Starting with Dr. Munoz, would you support a cap on how much a landlord can increase the rent on a tenant? This is sometimes known as rent stabilization.
Yeah, so I think that governors should work with municipalities to determine whether it's caps on rent control or rent stabilization acts, whether it's locally or as a statewide mandate. I also believe that when we think about housing, there's a lot of talk of affordable housing. I know it's the political thing to say, but what about low-income housing? What about public housing? What are we doing to change a culture that we have in Rhode Island that silos out all of these different classes of individuals physically? So when we talk about affordable housing, I don't want it lost from the conversation that we need to do more for low-income housing. We need to work with municipalities and to incentivize them locally to provide more on their end for development, even if it's changing the zoning laws. I think that the way that we can incentivize municipalities around these agreements, even if it's Rent Stabilization Act, is to actually ensure that we're supporting other areas, maybe education infrastructure, maybe allocating more dollars there. But the key with housing is ARPA dollars aren't going to solve the whole problem. We need to be accountable on the state side. Municipalities need to be accountable on their end. And unless we do something now, the next 7 generations will not have a place to live. And that is my biggest concern. That is why I'm fighting. And if there's any indication of how misplaced priorities are now, we can look at the Rhode Island Rent Relief Program to see that the disbursement of those dollars to the people that needed them was delayed. I will not be that type of governor.
Thank you, Dr. Munoz. Ms. Folks, rent stabilization.
I would not be a proponent of rent stabilization, but I think housing is an enormously important topic in this state. Affordability, I hear it every single day, people feeling like they're being squeezed out of this state at all income levels. And so I have a very specific plan here as well. I encourage you to look at my website that attacks both short, medium, and long term. In the short term, I agree with Dr. Munoz. We got $200 million from the federal government. We have only given $100 million of that out for rent relief. I talk to faith-based and community leaders every day who are fighting hard to make sure people have access to rent relief. I propose we introduce accessory dwelling units so that we could expand the supply of housing. And then I also have proposed a $160 million housing bond to increase supply. The fundamental problem we have in this state is we are 20,000 units short of housing. And that is because in the last decade, Rhode Island has produced the least growth in housing per capita of any state in this country. So everything I would do in this particular area to drive affordability is to increase supply, which is ultimately going to help people, and then get the federal money we got from last year out the door immediately to help the people who are urgently in need.
Thank you. Mr. Brown.
As I said earlier, Senator Mendes and I have a plan to build 10,000 truly affordable homes, including for low-income people, but that's going to take time. And as some of you know, I know many of you in this room, I've spent most of my life as an advocate and activist running nonprofit organizations. And so I don't really think in terms of election cycles. This is a crisis that is happening right now. And where this crisis becomes real for a lot of people, I mentioned earlier, is when rents go up and working people, to be clear, working people who are working full-time cannot afford it, and they end up on the street. And so that's why Cynthia and I went out in the winter and pitched tents outside the State House to demand that Governor McKee and our leaders start spending some of the ARPA funds, because we were facing a situation where we were going to have hundreds of people on the street in the freezing cold through the winter. It's important for everyone in this room to know that the contracts that were established for that winter crisis are coming up right now, and Governor McKee and his administration have no plan, and people are going back out on the streets. The advocates who've been fighting for this, RIHAP, DARE, and others, have been making this case for weeks that this crisis was coming. and nothing has been done, and we're going to be right back where we were. And what I want people to absorb in this room, you all have voices, is how extreme that is in the United States of America that our own people live on the streets. It is a policy decision. So it is the policy of the people in power that some of our people live outside. And we all need to own that and figure out what we're going to do about that. And just one last point, I think part of the reason that is perpetuated is because people tell a story that is untrue about people living on the street, that they're there because there's something wrong with them. They're different. They're less human than the rest of us. Not true. In my work, I've met them and worked with them. My running mate spends every Sunday morning feeding breakfast at the Mathewson Street Church to the unhoused. They are not other. They are us. They are our brothers and sisters, and we need to fight for them.
Governor McKee, I want to give you a chance to respond to the criticism from Mr. Brown, and also please tell me if you support rent stabilization.
Well, let's speak to housing. It's clearly one of the priorities that we have in the budget. Last year, I had 11 days to do a budget coming into office in an emergency situation, and we were able to put in a funding stream that is going to be an annual funding stream for housing in the low-income housing through the conveyance tax and a combination of state funds. So we've already got a jump start on that. Go to the Rhode Island 2030 plan. It talks about housing as being a priority, and we have funded that in our budget. One of the things that I realized coming in that there is no written housing plan in the state of Rhode Island. I'll say that again. All the advocates and everybody else at this point in time, when I put $5 million on the table in early fall to take care of the homeless issue, and I've made a promise and a commitment, if the budget is passed this year, that we will build shelter, which is not the best housing, but is certainly needed for the coldest day of the year. And in our budget, there's enough funds that we can do that, and we're partnering with Rhode Island Housing right now with staff in my office, along with the Rhode Island Foundation to make that happen. But housing is not just, it's from homelessness to fair market value. And it's a 39 city and town effort.
So, Governor, do you support rent stabilization, capping the amount that landlords can increase the rent?
There may be a spot for that, but again, without a plan, I think that you're basically picking out of the air, well, we'll do that, we'll do that. No, you need a plan. In our budget, there is a plan, and we are providing for the coldest day of the year right through determining, I see a lot of numbers, 10,000, 20,000. We don't know the number, ladies and gentlemen. We do not know the number, and we certainly do not know what area those numbers fall in. So we need a plan. There's money in the budget to do that. And also, when we have $250 million in the budget, be a comprehensive plan for housing. And inside of that, we're going to leverage those dollars. We should be able to get at least $1 billion worth of housing out of that $250 million if we do it correctly.
Secretary Gorbea.
Well, as the person on the stage that actually worked in housing for a very long time, I'm thrilled to finally see housing issues be discussed in this state. Back when I was executive director of housing work, and I think I met most of you in this room, we argued very convincingly that housing is part of the economic development strategy of this state. Now, I was proud of the work that we did to make sure that we built a couple thousand of units of housing with the first two housing bond issues, but we've got to do a lot more than just that. And I'm not sure that plans are necessarily what we need. We need action. With regards to your specific question regarding rent stabilization, I'm not sure we're there yet. I think that what we really need is to loosen the barriers to building of housing. And money is part of it. I argued successfully for putting housing into the governor's budget, and I was very glad to see Governor Raimondo take a lead on that. But it's beyond the money. It's the fact that we make it very difficult. There'll be plans in the municipalities. This is an area zoned for multifamily housing. And then it takes years for that development to actually have happened. And so what you need is leadership in the governor's office that will work with the cities and towns and will leverage some of the existing dollars that we have right now and deal with the concerns. Well, we'd love to build this housing, but we have infrastructure issues. Okay, as governor, I'll say, let's move that money into infrastructure in this community, but you've got to build me that housing. That's how you address housing issues. If it's an educational concern, you move the educational dollars. And that's the trick to public policy issues and solving them. It's that there's no one solution, there's no one silver bullet. I know that that's what people want to hear, but there's not one way of doing it. You have to layer the approaches. You have to hit at it from a number of angles to be able to move things forward.
Ms. Kalis, do you support rent stabilization?
No, rent stabilization doesn't deal with the problem. The problem that we have is a lack of inventory across the housing stock. So we need to address the issue, which is related to the cost of land, supplies, and supply chain issues, which makes it hard to develop, among other things. So what we need to do is address the problem, which is to create more housing units, and we can do that by taking a pool of money to incentivize developers specifically to work on affordable housing. That's one thing. The other thing is we need to have a better business environment so that we can incentivize growth so that developers will be incentivized to build more units.
Mr. Brown, Rhode Islanders have been struggling with inflation on everything.
Sorry, say that again?
Rhode Islanders have been struggling with inflation, everything from groceries to gas. Tell me something specific you would propose as governor that could provide relief.
Yeah, this inflation problem is preceded by decades of a situation in this state where the costs of the basic things people need, not talking about the luxuries, talking about housing, talking about health care, the basic things people need have gone up hundreds of percent, while wages have stayed essentially the same. And now we have this inflation over the last months on top of that. What that means is that for most people out there in our state, they are struggling to do what they most want to do, which is provide for their families. And some slip through the cracks. And that's not tenable. And we need to do several things to change that. One is we need to understand, and I just want to say, this is RIPEC. There are a lot of corporate leaders in the room, and you've been in a lot of discussions about how to build the economy in this state over the years. What I want to propose to you all is that the system we've had, the strategy that the people in power have had in this state for a long time, which is to take public money, funnel it to large corporations and the richest people at the top, and to tell us that that money is going to somehow trickle down and benefit middle class and working class people. 15 years ago, the people running things gave a tax cut to just the richest 1%, people making over $450,000 a year. That tax cut alone cost the state $1 billion over the last 15 years, while school buildings are literally crumbling. I mentioned earlier, $50 million for luxury condo development, $1.5 million to Amazon, the corporate giveaways from the Commerce Corporation, millions and millions of dollars. Stephen Pryor, who runs the Commerce Corporation, told us over and over those giveaways were going to pay for themselves. We found out a few weeks ago in a government report they did not. It was not true. And meanwhile, after all that spending going to corporations and the richest 1% in our state.
Going a little off topic, Mr. Brown.
No, totally on topic, because instead of that money going to corporate giveaways and the richest 1% in tax cuts, we should be investing in affordable housing. We should be investing in health care, not cutting Medicaid $250 million like the people running things have done. These decisions have made it harder for people to get by. They have raised the cost of things, and we haven't raised wages, and we also need to raise the minimum wage to $19 an hour.
Thank you. Secretary Gorbea, something specific that would provide relief for rising prices.
Well, one of the things, when this all started, people were really feeling it at the gas pump. And I know that it was very controversial that I mentioned that, we should suspend the gas tax for a little bit. And it was really about speaking to people's pain. I personally know people who are not filling out their gas tanks because they were waiting to see if maybe prices would go down by the end of the week. And in the end, government has to speak to people. It has to address the issues that they're facing in their everyday lives. Now, a lot of the inflation issues are bigger than our state. right? So we need to make sure that we're taking advantage of what opportunities there might be to address the larger picture. And one of them is the global supply chain. I mean, we're post-pandemic. We are having this massive economic crisis throughout the world. But we're having a global supply chain problem that's also spiking the prices. You know, I see Dave Schoenevert from the Manufacturers Association. We should be doubling down on manufacturing in our state to provide Rhode Island companies with that opportunity to help solve some of these issues. That kind of opportunity is something that I don't think is really being taken care of.
To be clear, are you still calling to suspend the gas tax? And if so, where would you make up that revenue?
So we're only talking, first of all, right now we have a lot of revenue, right? In fact, for dealing with the pandemic as well. So I would use some of the existing pandemic-related funds for that. And we're talking for a short time period. And we then have to double down and say, this is the reason why we need to move to alternative energy. It's a moment in space and time to say, I hear your pain, and as a result, I'm doing this in the very short term, and I'm gonna now also work diligently and rapidly to make sure that we have alternative energy being developed and opportunities for people to use that here in Rhode Island.
Governor McKee, something specific that could help with the rising cost of gas and groceries and so on.
Yeah, so this gives me a good opportunity to talk about the budget. Well over a $600 million surplus. We're waiting on the May revenue, which is going to increase that. It's my first budget. I propose budgets to break even, and I manage budgets for surpluses. And we're using those surplus dollars in a very intelligent way. We'll take a look at where we are in the May dollars and determine where there might be more rent relief over and above what I've already got proposed in the budget, which helps small businesses. Again, the vehicle phase out. Rhode Island's going to be a state for our business community as well as our residential that's not going to have a car tax. That's a major pivotal play that was started before I was there, and we're continuing doing that process. So it's a matter of being smart about how we use the surplus dollars. Right now, $100 million we're going to use to bring in $400 million of infrastructure dollars, and we're going to continue to do it that way. Short-term fixes are not going to work. Jobs are really important. Increase in people's income is important. In our budget, we have over $40 million for job training that's going to help do that, and that can happen very quickly because we know that Fidelity is looking for 800 people. I just met with FM Global. I know they're hiring. We know down Electric Boat they're hiring. The idea right now is to get people employed in the highest paying jobs and getting their skill sets up. So we'll take a look at where we are. But again, that's a significant surplus that we were able to manage our way to. Next year we'll do the same thing, and we'll use those dollars to take care of cans that have been kicked down the road for far too long. So we're going to continue to work. And the other piece I want to say, it's in order to get things done, you need to be able to work with people. I see municipal leaders in the audience here. We'll bring the municipal leaders together. But one of the things that I've done, and thank to the Speaker and the Senate President, is that I meet weekly during session with them, and we talk about these specific things. So on that particular question that was asked, we're going to take a look at what we got in the May revenue, which is coming out next week, and then we're going to propose some level of immediate tax relief to the people in the state of Rhode Island where it makes sense. But we're not going to use dollars that can invest in the long-term future of the families that live in the state of Rhode Island and use those unwisely.
Ms. Kalis, I've heard you say that the rising gas prices are part of what prompted you to run. What would you do to try and relieve this?
They're definitely something that I hear about, and inflation is hurting working families. So I would be for suspending the gas tax or anything that is flat in nature because that's a regressive fee or tax, and it hurts working families the most. That's a short-term solution, short-term relief. We also need to look at long-term solutions to deal with inflation because that's what we need to do. And in order to do that, we need to grow. In order to grow as a state, economically, we need to be more competitive. We need to have a better business environment. It is the only long-term way that we can deal with this issue.
Dr. Munoz, what would you do to relieve inflation?
Yeah, I just want to start by saying I believe that healthcare is a human right, housing is a human right, and education is a human right. But how do we ensure that these rights are actually accessed if we are not putting money into building people up? Bobby Kennedy once said, as long as there is plenty, poverty is evil, and I certainly believe that. Money gets printed, and it keeps going to corporations, to the top 1% if you look at the people making the biggest salaries in those corporations. Why isn't it going to the people? So it's not an issue of money, though inflation certainly is an indicator that it continues to get printed. It's not just a supply issue, though, it's a demand issue. So with market dynamics, we have willingness to pay. And the Fed can try to increase interest rates now, which is only going to make it harder for working families, but it's not going to stop the pending recession that we're faced against. So it's not just inflation, it's mismanagement. It's misallocation of priorities. It is a lack of moral judgment in government. So I believe that we need a supplemental wage program. Use ARPA dollars, create a pipeline out of poverty for families right now that cannot afford to live. That supplemental wage program may be temporary, but if we connect it to Rhode Island Promises program, we can help people build skills, we can support the micro businesses that are employing those minimum wage earners, and we can ensure that the workers themselves have one job instead of three. That the single mothers, like my mother, who was raising 5 children without any help, have an opportunity to thrive in the state of Rhode Island.
Thank you, Ms. Folks.
Yes, I have already proposed a $500 middle-class tax cut, and I would give this one-time tax cut to everyone in the state earning $100,000 or less. I think it addresses the immediate concern that people have around costs and inflation and the price of living in the state. And it uses part of the surplus that we have right now. So let's use some of the money to get back in people's pockets. I think it's a better proposal than a gas tax cut because it helps people who may not be driving or may not have cars. So there are 400,000 people in the state who would get this, and a couple both earning under $100,000, it would be $1,000 back in their pocketbooks.